Welcome to I Could Talk to You All Day. I'm Lauren Lefkowitz, recovering workaholic, perfectionist, and people pleaser.
And I'm John Spears, emerging from playing small, getting caught up in the inertia of life, and always being on.
I Could Talk to You All Day is a show for executives and emerging leaders. This is not just another leadership podcast. We're here to talk about what it means to be a leader while also being human.
So join us for raw, vulnerable, and probably pretty funny conversations about shifting from surviving at work and home to thriving in the life you've always wanted. Let's get the conversation started.
Hi, John.
Hey, Lauren.
We're here. So today we're going to continue our conversation about executive presence, and we're going to focus on authenticity. And when we think about authenticity and we think back to some of our more recent episodes, authenticity is wrapped up in kindness. It's wrapped up in courage, in vulnerability, and it's going to be wrapped up in a lot of what we talk about forever. But we made it its own topic today because as a whole, authenticity is such an important factor in executive presence and is often not what people think it is. So when you think of authenticity, what does it mean to you?
Lauren, when I think of authenticity, I think of really fully showing up as we are without the shoulds that oftentimes drive our behavior and our likes and our thoughts. It's really being fully expressed and not necessarily trying to fit in to the other people around you or certain office cultures or ways of being. And I remember, I was telling you this story a little earlier. I was like 24 years old. I had just graduated college. And at my university, I was a part of student life and I was an RA. And authenticity was a really big topic in my community. And I remember coming to DC as this bright-eyed 24-year-old. It was the winter of 2005. And I remember just talking about authenticity all the time. And my friend and colleague at the time, Emily Wyatt, was like, dude, like, stop talking about authenticity. Like, what do you use? It's like authenticity was like the buzzword that I was just saying all the time. And it was super important to me then as it is now. And I just remember how connected I felt and feel now to this idea of being authentic, to being fully expressed, to showing up fully without a lot of kind of the lens of you should be this way, you should act this way, you should think this way, you should look this way.
Yeah, it's the act and think of authenticity that really gets me. When I was up and coming in my career, there was a lot of information given at me about how an HR professional was supposed to be, was supposed to act, was supposed to be in relationship with employees. And I was given direction that it was time to separate myself from my friends at work and be exclusively HR. And in some respects, that felt true throughout my career. There is a little bit of almost a barrier with human resources that you can be a certain level of close to people. And then you have a limit because you may have to let that person go. You may have to have disciplinary action against that person. You may have to investigate something that person is involved in. And so there's always a small barrier. But what it meant to me was I wasn't allowed to be myself. I had a role to play. I was put in this role and I accepted it because I was really interested in the career. And I really hung on to it for a while. And it wasn't until I switched jobs to a less formal organization that I realized I was just allowed to be myself. And I became more and more myself over the years. But it really wasn't until I got active on LinkedIn that I realized how much other people crave authenticity from each other.
Yeah.
And I remember when I started getting active on LinkedIn, I would comment on people's posts here and there. And my first post was something to the effect of how to send a thank you note after an interview. I was just doling out advice. here I am finally on LinkedIn to give you the advice you've been waiting for. And a couple of posts in, I told a real story about something that had happened to me. And the feedback that I got was not just thank you for being vulnerable, which is something we've already talked about, but thanks for being just real, just coming out and telling a story. Here I came into LinkedIn as a vice president of HR, and there's, I think, a certain thing we think about what a vice president acts like, and that there's reserve and there's hold back. And that doesn't have to be true. You can coexist as a fully authentic person and a leader. And we're going to talk all about that as our conversation continues today.
Yeah, Lauren, you mentioned that we talked about vulnerability and that all of these conversations are really in the context of executive presence, and how executive presence and sort of mainstream business culture is how you speak, how you dress, how you look, how you act. And those are all external manifestations of what certain people think of as leadership or leadership qualities, or sort of the criteria to be a leader. And we're talking about all these internal aspects of leadership, right? Authenticity, kindness, bravery, vulnerability. And you mentioned vulnerability. And I really think that vulnerability really is an outgrowth of authenticity, right? You can't be vulnerable. You talked about your own experiences and sharing those experiences, but that really happens when you know yourself and when you're comfortable with yourself and you're making the choice to be your authentic self. That's when sort of those qualities of vulnerability can really come through. And so I kind of see authenticity as this kind of like envelope or foundation that really kind of wraps all the things we've been talking about over the past few weeks.
So we're going to come back to that choice.
Yeah.
I think that's such an important factor in becoming authentic, is really making that conscious choice. But when we say that, and then we just finish that sentence and move on to something else, the first thing that I hear from other people who are thinking about authenticity at work is that there's too much risk. Why would I do this? Why would I bother being vulnerable, going above and beyond to a new level of courage, being my whole self, bringing my whole self to work? Why would I bother doing that? Because it feels risky. So why does it feel risky?
Yeah, well, first, I think you're right. And I think we should acknowledge that there are consequences to our choices in any realm, right? We're talking in this case about authenticity, but there is risk and there are consequences to that. And I think from my own experience, the times when I have been inauthentic, there have been several factors that have played into that. Fear of rejection, not feeling safe, not having psychological safety or feeling safe in a certain area. As a gay man, I think that's very true in some of my experiences in the world of, can I visibly be authentically gay or sort of be myself in some sort of setting? So I think there's both a physical but also like psychological safety piece that plays into it. And I think, along with rejection, I think there is a real concern of fitting in. We all have a desire to like be a part of something and to feel a part of a group, and being authentic can put that at risk.
I would add to that if I am my whole authentic self at work, you're going to see not only my strengths, but my weaknesses. My fear always was looking incapable.
Yeah.
That if I am authentic at work, and this isn't just me, this is so many people I have talked to. It's about our illnesses, about our kids, about our other than. It's about anything that might make it look like people don't want to bother us with things because we are fill in the blank. The looking incapable was about my chronic illness, that I didn't want anybody to know that there was anything wrong with me because I didn't want them to hesitate and think, oh, I couldn't handle it. I know I've mentioned this before, and I think we talked about it during our conversation about vulnerability. But this also happens with people who have kids. I don't want them to know that I'm having trouble with daycare because they're going to think, oh, she cuts out early all the time, or he cuts out early all the time. Or if I tell people that I'm taking care of aging parents, well, are they just going to escape at 4 o'clock so they can get home to their parent who has the sundown Alzheimer's issue? Or can we count on them to work late or to come to this after hours meeting?
Mm-hmm.
And so this fear of bringing your whole self, of authenticity at work, is rejection, judgment, looking incapable. And so you have to decide, is it worth that risk? So what makes it worth the risk?
Lauren, I think I can only speak from my own experience. And I think for me, I just didn't want to constantly be thinking about what is the right response here? What is the right way to be here? What is the way that I'm going to fit in? That was really confining to me. In fact, it was exhausting for me to constantly be thinking about, what do I need to do, to say, to wear, how to act to be accepted, or to prove that I'm a leader, or to prove that I'm worthy enough to be at a table. It just got too exhausting for me. And the cost of that just wasn't worth it for me anymore. And so I remember a day I made a very conscious choice after I came out to be authentic, to show up fully. And I think, that choice deepens and you become more fully expressed. It's not like you make a choice one day and the next day you're just like fully expressed and sort of big all over. It takes some time. It took some time for me to grow into myself and to learn about myself and to become aware about myself and to really go inward and think about who I am, what I want, what I like, what I don't like, and how I'm going to show up. And so, I'm sure there are other reasons, but for me, just the cost of the exhaustion, the mental gymnastics that I was doing day in and day out at work, at home, with family, with friends, it just wasn't worth it anymore.
Yeah, I totally hear that, John. I noticed for myself that there was a long period of time in my career where I distinguished work Lauren from home Lauren, from not feeling well Lauren, from all of the other Laurens that existed, family member Lauren, the list goes on. And I felt like I was playing part of me in each of those roles. And it's really tiring to try to remember, does work Lauren joke around? Is home Lauren as effective and as efficient and high achieving as work Lauren? She wasn't, because she just really focused on work a lot of the time. What I've since learned was that as hard as I was trying to have these distinctions, to compartmentalize myself, that now when I run into people I worked with 20 years ago, they see the same Lauren that I am now. And I don't have to work at it. And so all of this work I was doing in my survival mechanism to control my environment and control who I let in and who I told things to and how I talked and how I communicated and whether I cursed or not and whether I was funny or not, didn't matter because I was doing it anyway when I wasn't thinking about it. So there is a part of us that is bringing our whole selves to work. And then we catch ourselves and we stop and we pull back. And it is just a lot of freaking work.
Yeah.
To always be focused on which version am I bringing with me.
I also think not only is it a lot of work, but like we are so much less impactful and effective when we're not our full selves. I often think about this as analogous to weak coffee. Do you know how like disgusting weak coffee is? How like it doesn't do the trick. It's not satisfying. It doesn't give you sort of the physical or mental benefits that you're looking for. Weak coffee is just like, ugh, it's just there. It's kind of like lukewarm water. It just doesn't do the trick. And I feel like when we are not showing up fully, we're kind of like weak coffee. Right. Not disgusting, not like that, but like, we're just not, you're gross. No, but we don't have that, like, I'm talking about a good cup of coffee is like super satisfying. And when we don't get that, it's just like, and in my own life, I can point to the times when I was not showing up fully, and I can see a direct correlation to my impact in an organization or my impact in the work that I was doing. And I think for me, it's a really good reminder that not only is showing up authentically important for me from like my own soul and for my own well-being, it also shifts and changes the dynamic of the environment around me. Like we change rooms when we're authentic. When we walk in our full power and our full authenticity, when we walk into a room, it shifts the dynamic. It changes the environment. And I love working with people who are authentic. I love working with you, Lauren, because when we show up, there's just like magic happens because we're both kind of in our flow. We're showing up, we're being real with each other, and we get to decide, is this for me? Is this not for me? You know, we know who we are. We know what the boundaries are. We know what the limits are. And I think that's like where the magic happens, both individually, but also in like team and in group settings, which, you know, you're talking about systems and organizations. We're talking about families, friend groups, work, every kind of environment that we're in. When we show up authentically, we totally shift the dynamic in a really powerful way.
John, I love our relationship because we can show up authentically for each other and also shift topics.
Yeah.
So I think one of the fears in showing up authentically is I'm going to bring the room down.
Yeah.
Right. If I come into the room with my problems, I'm going to bring the room down and then nobody's going to be able to move forward from there. And what I love about the way we interact is we can have a 20-minute conversation that ranges from something that feels terrible for one of us, work our way through it, and be laughing 5 minutes later about something else, and then be celebrating something else. Because we get to bring all of ourselves into the room with each other, there's no hesitation. There's no thinking, well, I shouldn't bring this into the room because we're supposed to be having fun right now.
Mm-hmm.
We get to bring our whole selves in. And I love your example of weak coffee, especially. It's not an analogy I've heard before, but I will use it from here on out. Because weak coffee looks just like good coffee. So
yeah.
The same me is walking into the room, whether I'm being authentic or not, whether I'm choosing to bring all of me or just bring like one little sliver of me that feels like the appropriate version of myself to bring into the room. Both are the same Lauren Lefkowitz. Both are, you're going to have the same memory of the face that you saw. You either will remember the subject we talked about and the sliver of expertise I brought, or you will remember that you enjoyed talking to me, that we laughed, that we engaged, that we had a deep conversation. And I get to choose whether I bring that into the room or not. I get to choose whether I bring in rich, deep coffee or the weakest version of me. And that's so powerful to be in choice that way. One of the things you and I have talked about, and we talk about a lot, is the shoulds. And so people who are listening to this may be thinking like, oh, I guess I should be more authentic.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, that begrudging way to come into the room. Cool. I'm going to decide to be more authentic because I should be. I should bring my whole self to work. And there's going to be an internal argument of I should bring my whole self to work. I'm going to do that, except I don't really want to talk about my kids, or except I don't really want to talk about the fact that I'm gay, or except I don't want to bring any issues that are going to cause a stir. So I should be mostly myself, but not all of myself. Or I should be all of myself, but I don't feel comfortable with it. So I'm not going to be. So how do you manage this internal conversation about the shoulds?
Wow, Lauren, that is a really good question. I think for me, the first thing that comes to mind is that authenticity is a choice, and you get to make a choice about how authentic you want to be, when you want to be authentic, and what that looks like. I think if folks are out there are struggling with authenticity, you know, we often talk about in coaching, there's this question that people ask that is really infuriating, that I've had it asked to me, and we've talked about this, and that is, what is? What is? And I think being okay with where you are in this process and just being able to acknowledge that is really powerful. It takes the shit out. It takes all the expectation out and brings it back to what's actually happening now. And if you're struggling with authenticity, that is totally fine, right? That is okay. I've struggled with being authentic before. Authenticity and everything we talk about here is a journey. There's a spectrum, there's a process. And so if you're out there and you're saying, I don't want to be authentic, I don't care to be authentic, this is probably not the podcast for you, frankly. Just putting that out there, because we're going to talk about this process. We're going to talk about the journey of being more authentic and everything we're doing. But I think if folks are out there and they want to be authentic, but they just can't figure out how to do it, I think being okay with that is step one. I also thought about something you said, Lauren, and I jotted it down around strengths and weaknesses and showing up fully in that way. Being authentic, I think, really starts with having a deep love, care, respect for ourselves. If we don't think we're worthy, if we don't think we're good enough, if we have lots of judgment around ourselves, it's going to be really hard to walk in a room and be confident. And so if folks are struggling with being authentic, I would encourage you to explore that. How much are you okay with yourself? Do you fully accept yourself? Do you fully love yourself? Are you in love with yourself? And I know that's like a really weird question to ask people in a leadership podcast, but do you love yourself? Do you value yourself? Do you think you are awesome? Not in a proud, egotistical way, but in a way that's like full of care and delight for the person that you are.
That's so beautiful. I do something every once in a while on LinkedIn, and I've done it in a group setting as well, where I ask people to make a list of the 7 people in their lives they love the most. Sometimes I use 7, sometimes I use 5, sometimes I use 10. And then I ask, why aren't you on the list? I don't ask what number you are, because 100% of the time people have not put themselves on the list.
Yeah.
And you should be number 1 if we're talking about shoulds.
Yeah.
Right? You get to be number 1 on your list, because if you don't love yourself, if you don't accept yourself for who and how you are, and that doesn't mean there aren't things you want to do differently or better or more of or grow in certain ways, but you have value just being here and existing. And if you aren't willing to fall in love with yourself, as you said, then it's very hard to be willing to be your authentic self with others, because you don't know who that is.
Right.
For people for whom this is resonating and they're thinking, okay, cool, one day I'll love myself and then I'll be authentic. Because that doesn't just happen. It's work. It's a choice, right? And we've talked before about the have-tos versus the get-tos. And so there may be some people thinking right now, okay, guess I have to love myself, right? So if you can shift that to, I get to love myself, how cool is that? Where do you start? Where do you begin to create space in your life to explore how to fall in love with you?
My journey around loving myself and accepting myself has been in like fits and starts over the past decade. As people who have been listening to this podcast know, my dad left when I was basically 8, never had a relationship with him. And so there are some deep-seated wounds of abandonment and worthiness issues that I have in my life that are really fundamental to this, that really have in the past blocked me from feeling worthy and feeling loved. And so I've done a lot of work, but therapy, I've done a lot of coaching around this. But I think more recently, I have just started to be kind to myself and to treat myself like I treat people that I love. And so, I know you're out there and you have like negative self-talk. You do something, you're like, how stupid was that? Or you're stuck and you're like, oh, I'm so weak. And that's the way I used to talk to myself. I don't talk to myself like that anymore. When I'm really struggling, which frankly, I have been a lot lately. I'm in this big transition. I just moved to the Midwest. Lots of new things happening in my life. And so there's a real need for me to control everything. And I'm working on trusting more, and I'm working on being more open and having play and love in my life and fully showing up for the people that I love. It's been a really hard thing for me to, it's been a really hard transition for me to make. And there've been lots of ups and downs in that. And instead of me saying, John, you're 42 years old, I can't believe that you can't do this one thing, I've been saying, John, you're doing the best you can do. You're showing up the best you can show up. you are so kind to yourself and to other people. And I think for me, making that shift, no longer talking to myself in the really harsh, negative way that I tend to talk to myself, or that I've talked to myself in the past, has really shifted the way I feel about myself. Like, I feel really good about myself now, and the way that I'm handling things and the way that I'm showing up. Yeah, I make mistakes. I just talked to my son earlier today about mistakes that I made, and said, hey, like, I really want to be the best dad that I can be. I'm a human. I make mistakes. Like, please tell me what you need me to do more of or to do less of. Like, I want to hear that from you. So it doesn't mean I'm perfect, and that there is not an acknowledgement that I need to grow and shift in some areas of my life. There's just a willingness to be okay with who I am, and a grace towards myself. How about you?
I think that my story of becoming authentically me is a little more recent. There was a time where I spent a lot of time in therapy when I first started dealing with chronic illness. And for me, that period of time was getting like sort of to the line of okay.
Mm-hmm.
I was not okay. I was grieving the loss of a life that I had imagined going a certain way. And so working with a therapist for many years helped me deal with that grief and sort of create my new version of normal. And then I didn't do any work for quite some time because I was working all the time, right? I was very engrossed in work. It was the thing I was good at. It was the thing I was confident in. And I didn't think I needed anything else. And then over the last few years, what I realized was I was holding on so tightly to working all the time because I didn't know what else I was. So I had to discover what was authentically me.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that through coaching, through other kinds of therapy, through some self-discovery, through support of the friends I had grown up with and carried with me through all of the years, through newer friends that I met through various channels, including you. The support that I've received when I was willing to ask for it, when I was willing to be authentically me and vulnerable and courageous and all of the other things that wrap up into authenticity, the result has been my life is so much cooler. I'm so much more willing to fully be myself. And at my core, I just want to have like a fun, amazing, joyful life. And I want to bring that to other people who are where I have been and who are stuck in one version of themselves and afraid to bring out all of them.
Yeah.
And what I notice when I'm willing to be authentically me is that, first of all, people acknowledge it. When I meet people who have only known me through LinkedIn posts or LinkedIn lives, they always say, you are exactly who I thought you would be, which is the best compliment I could get.
100%.
Right?
100%.
There is nothing hidden with me anymore. I am just all here. I hope you like it. If you don't like it, I'm not for you. This podcast isn't for you. My coaching isn't for you. Cool. I mean, I can't imagine why you wouldn't like me, but there are people out there.
But Lauren, there's so much power in that, right? To say, you know what? I'm for some people. I'm not for other people. Like it or leave it. It's not a flippant way to be. It is a really empowering place to be, to say, when I am going for a job interview, or when I'm talking to a prospective client who wants to hire me, I'm really clear about who I am. I'm really clear about my approach. I'm really clear. I am the same way with them then that I am with you on this podcast, recording, with my family. And that continuity, that ability just to be without having to manufacture different types of John, which I've totally done in the past, is incredibly freeing. And it's created so much space, and I want to acknowledge that for you, but also just for others. Like, there's a lot of power when you're in an organization as a leader to say, this is me. If I don't work here, I need to go. I will fit in somewhere else. It's just not here.
Amazing. John, I could talk to you all day.
Oh my God. Are we done?
We're done.
Are you serious?
We're out of time.
Okay.
Can you believe it? This has been an amazing conversation and so empowering for me to hear you talk about your path to authenticity, to talk about my own path to authenticity, and just gets me really excited for the people listening to this, that they are going to see another side and another opportunity to get to be more authentic. We are going to talk about boundaries on our next episode, which is another area that's really important in executive presence. How to set boundaries, how to hold boundaries, how to not be afraid of boundaries. And I cannot wait to have that conversation with you.
Neither can I.
Yeah. Thanks so much for being with us again, everybody. And we'll see you next time.
We're so grateful you decided to be with us during this episode. Subscribe, rate, and share this podcast with your friends and colleagues. And join us next time for more Real Talk.